Man, what an interesting day.
No,
Hey, look, I thought you'd appreciate my ginormous earrings.
They are ginormous and
She's
they're
always surprised because I have no neck, Mr. Robinson. Dr. Robinson, I don't have
I,
any neck. So, yeah.
well, wait a second. You have plenty of neck compared to me.
Well, it's my relative. If I wear a hat, you would say that.
Okay.
You're live on Facebook and you're live on YouTube.
Go ahead, Cita. So
Thank you. Hi.
look at us. We made it. I think we may be through the glitches, the technical glitches. Welcome, everyone. We are really excited today to be talking about something that has been extraordinarily relevant, very much long overdue, a real conversation about reparations and further the fact that this entire country is poised to have this conversation. First of all, I want to kind of start us off by saying that, you know, this is not about an apology, because a lot of people, think, let's just apologize for it, and when we start thinking about American chattel slavery and what followed it, we recognize that there has been indeed an injury. I'm pleased that many have taken up this banner, going back some. My people, like Randall Robinson, I'd like to read a piece from his book, The Debt. And he got a lot of pushback for the debt. But at the same time, it was one of those things that people were not really prepared. You couldn't even say racism halfway around his time. So he says, our whole society must first be brought to a consensus that it wants to be and it wants to close the socioeconomic gap between the races. It must accept that the gap derives from the social depredations of slavery. Once and for all, America must face its past, open itself to a fair telling of all its people's histories, a full acceptance of the responsibility for the hardships it has occasioned for so many. It must come to grips with the increasingly indisputable reality that there's not a white nation, and this is not a white nation. Therefore, it must dramatically reconfigure its symbolized picture of itself to itself. And when he wrote The Debt, and along with that, Quitting America, which is just extraordinary book, I was so pleased to read The Atlantic, that Ta-Nehisi Coates started the conversation up all over again. 250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal, 35 years of state-sanctioned redlining. Until we reckon with the compounding moral debts of our ancestors, America will never be whole. The Case for Reparations, Ta-Nehisi Coates. And of course, we have Raymond Winbush, his book, Should America Pay? So it's not that the conversation has not been going on. I'm pleased to see young folks jumping in, like Coates and like Kendi, and all of those brilliant young folks that are initiating a new discussion, a new language around what is just and fair. I'm happy today to have Dr. Howard Robinson with us. He is a scholar, he is a historian, he is an activist. He is indeed our brother. Dr. Robinson, please tell us a little bit about yourself as we launch into this discussion about reparations.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot. I'm the archivist at Alabama State University. I teach history. I'm originally from New York, but I've been in Alabama. I've went to Alabama State University, a historically Black college. I graduated from there twice with a master's, undergraduate degree and a master's degree, and went on to the University of Akron and earned a PhD in history, and with a focus on African American history. And so I'm back in Alabama. I was in Georgia for a short time, and I'm back in Alabama at Alabama State University, where I work with the National Center for the Study of Civil Rights and African American Culture. And we have a very full agenda. We deal with a lot of issues. We do conferences and book talks, and we just recently, not recently, but we've been collaborating with the National Park Service, and we built an interpretive center that looks at the Selma to Montgomery March and that 54-mile trek from Selma through Lowndes County to into Montgomery. And we celebrate and we collect materials related to voting rights. And that is, I think, both an issue that had its importance in the 1960s, but also resonates today.
Absolutely.
And that Voting Rights Act of 1965 was assaulted and undermined in this very state. And so we have to remind our young people, that they helped change that law and implement that law in the first place, and need to be a part of the efforts to strengthen that law today. So I work with the National Center, and
I was there. I actually been there with Floyd, right? And I was there when it wasn't even finished when I was there.
Well, actually, to tell the truth, you spoke to my class.
Whoa.
You spoke to my class. We met in the
That's
in,
right.
in the Abernathy Hall, and so I was delighted. We were when I say we, the dean of the library, who's director of the National Center, she alerted me to your book some years ago, and so we have. You've written one of those works where you instinctively say, somebody should have done this already. So I'm glad to see somebody did it, and you did it. So it fits into what we do in Montgomery.
So I want us to kind of launch into a discussion around, and again, my book, I was mentioning before we were on air about, when I wrote my book, my background is in health, mental health, really, really deeply into the community and looking at, the wounds that accompanied this whole process that we have gone through towards insisting upon justice for ourselves and equality and equity. But, even now when you look in the news, and this was really a powerful experience for me. In my book, I wrote a story about my father. And you know how they're saying now, my goodness, I was listening to NPR and they said, well, next, racism, inequity, institutionalized structural inequality in farming next, right? So this Black farmer comes on and he says, he's been farming, it's been in his family, all of this, but he doesn't get the same amount of money for his crop.
Right. I heard that.
He doesn't get that other people. So we have to understand, I've said this before, every major institution in America at its foundation, at its root, is literally racist. I mean, we're looking at white supremacy being what held it. And at the same time, I move over and now they're saying, gosh, we're seeing it in the military. Really? You're just not seeing it in the military? It has always been a part of the military. And so they're saying these people, are fighting for our country. But when you hear the story of Black men and Black women in the armed services, when you hear about what they encountered, read the stories of people like Sammy Davis Jr. But my father talked about, I'll tell you, this was such a powerful experience for me, because I said, I don't care what anybody does. We're not waiting for someone else. And we don't need someone else for us to take care of ourselves to the degree that we continue to heal and to make certain that you don't get to hurt my children and their children. We have to change that. But my father, I tell the story, I rarely tell the story, actually. It's written in my book, but I rarely tell it because for many years I couldn't tell it without crying. But I didn't understand until very recently, about why my father said what he said to me. My father was dying. And so all of my siblings, we were at his bedside and he called each of us separately. I'm the baby of the family. So my father's a Mason. So he gave me his Mason ring. I don't know what that means. All I know is my father, it's supposed to go to me and I can't tell you anymore because he couldn't tell me anymore because he'd have to kill me. Right? That's the kind of thing with the Masons. So he gave me his Mason ring. He sat on the side of his bed and he knew that these would be the last words he would say to me. So this was one of those true last words, right? He knew that he would never see me again. And the first thing he said to me was, he said, Joy, the road of life is a long and hard road. He says, do not try to travel that road alone. You will need people along the way. And then he turned so that he wasn't I was looking at the side of it, and it was deliberate. He turned his face from me. And he says, you know, I was a young boy growing up down the bayou in Louisiana, which is where my family is from. And he said, I was walking down the road, I was a young boy, and some white people drove up in a truck. And they said, boy, get over here. And you load these boxes, boy, and you do it now. And he turned to me and he says, and I did it, Joy, but I did it for you. And then he said, and then I was in the Navy. All my uncles, all of them were, you know, were in the armed services in some capacity. My father was in the Navy. He says, I was a grown man, Joy. I was a grown man. And they said, boy, you get over here, you clean these shrimp, boy, and you clean them now. And then I could see my father trembling. And I could see the tear rolling down his face. And he says, and I did it, Joy, but I did it for you. And I remember, you know, thinking, these are the last words he said to me. So he carried the burden of that humiliation his entire life. And he was saying to me, had I not done it, you wouldn't be here, Joy. Right. And so I never understood the extent of that until, as being a veteran, we had a member of my husband's family passed away, and they were buried in the same cemetery as my father. And I realized, and this is in Riverside, California, and I had never gone back to see the marker. I'd never gone back. It was just extraordinarily difficult for me. And so this time after the funeral, I looked up his name and I found the marker. And when I found the marker, my sister-in-law looked at his ranking. And because you see, you couldn't have any ranking as a Black man. And it showed his ranking. And then we went to the book, the original book, little weird book that showed what his responsibilities were. And it was to serve those officers. And that's what, so I never understood where that was all he could do. You could be a cook, you know, you could be, and again, based on his rank, because he was a Black man, he couldn't get any further. And that was something, and here he was fighting, you know, for his country. So I think that for me, it was something I didn't understand. And as I think about the kinds of humiliation, the kinds of injury, and of course, that's quite personal, but we have to understand that this has affected us economically, it has affected us on every level. But what you cannot do, you can't have my heart. I'm not giving that to you. And so I've made it my business to look at those injuries and to heal them and to stop some of those injuries from occurring and being passed along. So I want to start off with the question of, why do we need reparations? What does that mean to you personally? Again, you too, Bahia.
Before we get started is just to say that, you know, I hear that story of my grandfather. I know it well. And I think about the sacrifices that all of my grandparents made for us. And I think about the fact that where we are right now, a lot of folks are feeling like my age are feeling like Randall Robinson. They want to quit America. They're tired of this. It's a level of exhaustion. And so part of what I'm wanting to also hear from Dr. Robinson has to do with, where is the hope when it comes to reparations? What is the hope? Because if you can't have my heart and you've taken my dignity in so many ways, what will it restore? What is the possibility? So if you could speak to that, I'd love to hear that.
You know, what comes to mind is it's really two conflicting or contending ideas. One, Dr. Degruy, I think is steeped in your research, and that is this idea that Black people have been harmed, deeply harmed by 400 years, generational subjugation and exploitation, worldwide, in a worldwide phenomenon that impacted millions of people and reverberated around the world. And so but Black people here in the United States, just like Black people in the Caribbean and the rest of the diaspora, but the Black people in the Western Hemisphere experienced a certain type of injury, and so part of that pull and that conflict is to admitting that there's something wrong, that we're not okay. And you look at the historical injury, and you could see, I mean, just as a historian, particularly someone who's interested in the Black experience, and I could remember my maturation as a historian and how I dealt with these sources. I'm in Alabama. I worked at the Department of Archives and History, so I could see and touch slave records and bill of sales and all of these documents that reflect the experiences of Black people in this nation, and so that reverberates, particularly, I'm in Alabama. I grew up in New York, Long Island, New York, and so I came to Alabama really as a student in college to experience something different. But I definitely have experienced something different. But the injury, and you look at these stories and these accounts of the barbaric way that slavery was imposed on Black people and people of African descent, and how people had to navigate through that experience and had to develop certain mechanisms to adjust to that trauma. And so today we have to, on one hand, we have to say that we have to recognize the psychological and spiritual impact of that experience. And on the other hand, see that tension is that we're supposed to, like, as Black men, we're supposed to be, unfazed, and we're supposed to be leaders, and we're not supposed to admit to weaknesses and foibles. And so that herein, I think that tension, or in terms of pride, when you're dealing with white folks and not wanting to admit that no, something's wrong. There's systemic issues that we're dealing with, in Black community and the Black psyche. So I think that reparations can speak to that, to that dynamic. I also I have a story I would like to tell. We tell a story, so I'm gonna tell a story. I was married. I met my wife while at Alabama State. We were both at Alabama State, and she's from Brooklyn and I'm from Long Island, New York, but we met in Montgomery. And so after I graduated, we got married, and we decided to get married in a park called Oak Park. It's right across the street, really, from Alabama State University. But at one time, this park was a jewel of a park. But it's just a lot of grasslands, wooded areas. There's a little garden area, but it used to have a merry-go-round and a swimming pool, a zoo, a little train. I mean, it was one of the South's most important and impressive parks, until there was a threat to desegregate that park. Okay, so my wife gives me. We decided. I asked my wife to marry me, and she said yes, and we decided to get married in this park. Well, I have some to-dos, so I'm supposed to go to Oak Park, and I'm supposed to get a permission to pay the little fee and get permission to have a wedding at the park. So I walk into the office. There's this blue-haired older white lady sitting at the desk. And I say, I'd like to reserve the gardens for a wedding on August the 7th. And so she says fine. And she writes out the little receipt, and I pay her my $15. And then I check it off my list of things to do when I go about my way. Well, when I was in grad school, my mentor at Alabama State, Dr. Dorothy Autry, asked me to come back and speak. And so I'm on this panel, and I'm in grad school now. She introduces me as an expert on civil rights, and I'm like, oh my goodness, but I'm on the panel with this guy, Mark Gilmore, right? In 1957, Mark Gilmore walked through Oak Park at 16 years old, was stopped by the police, beat, arrested, and his parents didn't know where he was, right? He had to give 50 cents to another inmate to let his mother know that he had been incarcerated. And she found out 2 weeks after he was in jail, right? And so Mark Gilmore's mother, once he got out, now Mark Gilmore's mother was an incredible woman. They messed with the wrong woman, right? She was involved in the Montgomery Improvement Association. She had raised money for the Montgomery bus boycott. She was, a force. And so she partnered with attorney Solomon Say, and they sued the city, right? The city realized in 1957, after the Brown versus Board of Education case, they realized they were going to lose this lawsuit. They closed Oak Park and all the other parks in Montgomery. They closed Oak Park for 6 years, built a fence, filled in the swimming pool, tore out the train tracks, sold off the animals. So they destroyed that park, fenced it in, and said, if Black people are going to be allowed to use this park, no one could use this park. And then they channeled their resources into the YMCA to allow white kids to have recreational opportunities through the YMCA, right? And so eventually they opened that park up again. Mark Gilmore becomes a city councilman in the city of Montgomery, right? And so I'm sitting on this dais and talking to this group, and I share with them that story. I say, I'm sitting here, and I was able to go and pay and get my little permission to get married at Oak Park without giving it a second thought, because Mark Gilmore was beat, thrown in jail, had to sue, and then had to wait the city out for 6 years before they opened that park up again. So this is a relatively recent phenomenon, right? And so these are the injuries that Black people have suffered through. And like you say, Dr. Degruy, to provide us with opportunities that we can enjoy now.
That's right.
And so, but and I look at, and I tell my students, the fact that you sit in this classroom sets you aside and apart from your contemporaries who don't have this opportunity or are not afforded this opportunity in the same way you were afforded this opportunity. And so I think that the injuries are widespread. Another thing I want to say about this, and the park is a good example, because a park is just one area where Black people had to individually identify, launch litigation against, and then because they had to sue the park, they had to sue. So the city lost their lawsuit, right? So they had to integrate their park. So what they decided to do, we just won't open the park again, because once we open it, we have to open it on an integrated basis. But Black people in Montgomery had to sue and had to challenge the library, the public library, right? The schools. They had to the cemeteries. I mean, so every facet of life required an attack, a frontal assault, litigation, protest. We're not even talking
basic human rights, for basic human rights.
Basic rights.
Litigation for basic human rights.
I'm not talking about class action suits. I'm talking about individual lawsuits. That's what white folks made Black folks do in this nation, and in Montgomery in particular, and other places throughout the South. They made them attack these vestiges of segregation and discrimination one by one. And
You know,
so,
I have a question. I have another question, and this is something that, again, what gets launched about reparations, well, is, you know, it's just too hard. You know, who will get it? Who isn't? Who's Black? All kind of stuff shows up. But other people, you know, there's precedence, and so in a way, when I look at where we are, you have this fantasy that white America has, that, you know, everything I have, I've earned. You know, I've earned it all.
Deserve it. I
And
deserve
I
it.
deserve it. I'm entitled to it, right? When we built it, you know, literally, when that wealth was because of the sweat of our brow, was because of what you were standing on top of us. And so now, as these things unfurl, it's not that it's always been true, right? We've always known. So we look at the insurance company, these universities, hospitals, all of the major corporations are standing on our wealth. And so it becomes a question. And this is where, you know, I think, you know, I know that I was my father's hope for here. I was my father's hope. He looked at me and he says, somehow, Joy, I need you to somehow make it worthwhile what happened to me. And my father knew me. But at the time he was saying, I wasn't even able to grieve for at least a year after, because I couldn't even understand what he was saying to me. He said, tell me it was worth it, Joy. Tell me it was worth it. And so I'm looking at these things, and I'm looking at the fact that the struggle we still have right now, you know, 2021, we still have. That's why they're sleeping at the Capitol, right?
you know, it's interesting you say about the Capitol. I think Felicia Bell, Dr. Bell, who's at the Smithsonian in DC. She was here in Montgomery at the Rosa Parks Museum, but she wrote her dissertation on the Black labor used to build the nation's capital, right? So these folks defiled the building that Black folks built, you know, and so you know, and I say that to say that your point is well taken. When you try to disassemble the investment made by 400 years of forced and exploited labor, from the ability of this nation to rise, to be able to exploit its resources, right? So be able to and you know, cotton was the nation's leading commodity, right? Cotton fueled the Industrial Revolution in the United States. It was the reason why railroads were profitable. It was the reason why the riverboat system and the transportation networks were developed. It was the reason why these roads, you know, splintered out and fanned out throughout the South in order to facilitate the movement you know, of cotton in the world economy. And so, and the financial institutions that supported the cotton industry, you know, though the tentacles reverberate. The shipping industry in the New England area that built those ships, and so the phenomenon that is America, you know, was built on the backs of laborers, and a large number of those laborers, a large segment of those laborers, were enslaved Africans. And you know, in Edward Baptiste's book, The Half That Has Never Been Told, he talks about the economic impact that this system of slavery and how productive it was, that economic impact, not only in this world, but I mean, this nation, but how it reverberated around this world. And so for anyone to suggest that the resources, the resources that were accumulated, you know, in the 18th and 19th century don't impact,
Right.
you know, the economic engine that is today, that is ludicrous, right? You know, so we'll point to people will point to every day, the framers of the Constitution, our founding fathers, so to say, right? And the words in the Constitution, and what they have, what those individuals have bequeathed this nation, right? But and so we're supposed to understand the direct connection of Americans to this phenomenon in the founding of this institution, and what flows from it. The way that people benefited from the lives of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and these other individuals. But we're not supposed to connect the economic exploitation of 4 million people in this nation, and how that economic exploitation created a foundation for this nation. We're supposed to divorce that part.
Like you said,
Forget about it.
It is. And the other piece to this, and I want to hear from you too, Bahia, but you'll hear people say, well, I'm not privileged. I don't understand what you mean by white privilege. I didn't own slaves, right? And again, because going all the way back to what Randall Robinson and others have said, you don't even know your own history, because we've never told the truth, right? So everybody gets in their feelings, they get upset. I just don't understand. I'll say it again. I'll probably say it every week. When people said, when all this stuff started happening at the Capitol, this isn't America. This is not America. Yes, it is. It absolutely is America. And so this whole idea of privilege, and people, get their, their wads all up. I'm going, are you kidding me? You don't think that 400 years of unpaid labor did not yield privilege? What are you talking about, right? And so when you see people now, and even in my life, my mother told me now, my father told me, Joy, you got to be twice as good to just get to basic fare. And everything I did was always the tension. Everywhere I went was that tension that said, not you, not you. So I want to talk about, what does reparations look like? Now, before you answer that question, I want to say that I've been thinking a lot. Ever since we decided to have this conversation, I started thinking about repair, right? Now, being injured, being healed, that's one thing, but repair. Let's talk about repair. So, when you repair something, and I can relate to this because my daughter and I are very well known for our projects. We get on projects, we fix stuff, and we just like doing it. And sometimes when you're repairing something, sometimes what you need to do is shore it up, right? You go, okay, there's a little rust here, there's some residue, there's something restricting it. Let's just clean that all out and shore up the actual structure. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes you say, well, we're gonna have to replace this piece. We got, it's not working, we gotta replace it. And sometimes you gotta replace the whole thing. And there's a lot of stuff that's in this country that you can't fix it. Mm-mm. It cannot be fixed, because I've said to everyone, it's a perfectly working system. The problem is, it has not ever worked on our behalf because it was never about us. But it does work. And that's why everybody was surprised, because this is working. No, it's never been working for us. And so these structures have to be removed and rebuilt. You can't fix it. I have people all over the country telling me, Joy, how do we fix policing? Right. So again, what does it look like?
Well, this is what we talked about when you talked about you used to tell me when I was a kid, if you start to put the pickle jar top on wrong, you just got to take it off. There's no trying to, once you're halfway screwing it in, to make it actually screw right. Like, it's just not, you set it on a course that is going to be off. And so I think that, I was talking to people today about campus policing, and we had to change that to a much broader conversation about what does it mean to feel safe on a campus. Because again, policing, the ideology of policing, you have to understand that. So the police that are all up in arms, there are some good cops. The fact is, your system has always worked effectively to oppress from its beginnings, right? From slave patrols, the way that you even got started was to try to keep me in bondage. That was the goal of the root, the beginnings of policing. So if you don't understand that, you're of course going to say, well, there's some good cops. Yeah, okay. And there's some, this is the same way we look at the ideology of serial killing, right? Where did all that come from? And you go, I don't understand. People have been serial killing us for generations, right? So what I keep thinking about, though, this is the thing, is it makes me, do you remember, I was going to say Tales from the Dark Side, but it wasn't. It was the Twilight Zone. Do you remember the Twilight Zone where the woman is she's wrapped in bandages, and every time she goes somewhere and they take off the bandages, they don't show the audience the bandages, they just show they hear the reaction. Oh God, like you think this one is horrible, right? And so she puts the bandages back on, and everywhere she goes. And finally at the end, you realize they take her bandages off and they show you, and her face looks perfectly normal. But all the people around have these really distorted pig faces. And it was called Beauty is in the Eye of the Beholder. That's what I feel like when I'm talking to these white people. Like you literally see this. You're literally, it's like body snatched people, because like literally they don't, what privilege? And I'm going, the fact that you're saying that lets me know you're a pig face. Like that's what like you don't have any real perspective. And it blows my mind. I'm like, I feel like I'm on another planet, and you're not, are you not paying attention to what's happening? But again, if the beholder is always the person who's beholding what is beautiful, what is valuable, what is important, what is smart, what is deserving, if that beholder is always the pig face, then it doesn't matter how normal we try to, it doesn't matter. You're the pig face, and you think we're the ones. Right? I'm sorry.
You know what? So one of the things that I've done in my own research, I wrote my dissertation on the impact of desegregation on Montgomery, Alabama, but this is a longitudinal study, so it goes from the end of the Civil War to the 1980s. But one of the things I could not help but deal with was the criminal justice system. It was just so pervasive in the story of Black people, and it was so obvious that it was a tool of control. Although I started in the Civil War, I had to go back a little further to sort of provide context. And then, so you saw this continuity between the slave patrols and the organization of police department and policing, particularly in the South, but more specifically in Montgomery, Alabama. And then I sort of traced this through time. And so, okay, so that's the background. About a year ago, I had my daughter, and so I laughed at the beginning of our conversation because you said that some people are talking about quit America, So my daughter spent most of 2020 in Nigeria, right? And then, my wife was really concerned. And so she finally came back to the United States for about a month, right? So she's back in Nigeria, right? But she challenged me and my wife. We were having a conversation, and she challenged me on this idea of abolishing the police department, right? And so abolishing, contemporary policing. And I was hostile to that idea initially. And she just went in and she made her argument, and to the degree that I am probably one of the more aggressive and proponents of abolishing the police as anyone. But there's this and there's this idea in the civil rights lexicon that talks about the beloved community, right? And I tell my colleagues, I say, we are part of that an effort to build the beloved community, to continue King's dream, right? Does that community have police? And do they incarcerate people? Is that the beloved community? Is that the way we deal with the ills of our society? And so in terms of reparations, I'm a little different. I do agree that some of these institutions at their core are destructive and were created to control and to exploit Black people. So that the reason why they look like they're controlling and exploiting Black people is because that's what they were created to do. All right, I have no problem with that. Now, what I do think is that you can reform your way to change, if we're working towards the same goal, right? So because you want to abolish the police, and you say, well, reform is just we're just reforming an illegitimate system, and I say I agree with that, but I have the same goal. My goal is to abolish the police, right? So then our issue becomes, how do we get to that goal? And my approach does not exclude you from taking your approach, right? So one of the things that I started to do, we were doing at the National Center, start to look at ways that we could move towards the beloved community, which in my mind is a community that's devoid of policing and incarceration. And so some of the things that I looked at we looked at as reforms, really the Montgomery Police Department and the mayor are doing, right? He starts rolling out, they start rolling out some of these initiatives. When I say that, I mean in terms of, okay, we're going to start looking at having mental health mental health workers start to look at how we respond to obvious mental health calls, or this community has divested its interest in community centers. We're going to reopen these community centers and start to funnel money into providing these types of after school and extracurricular opportunities and access for our young people. So now a number of things that they are starting to do in terms of putting emphasis on having people of color, more people of color in positions of authority, and other positions in policing. So then what I realized then is that, well, we're not trying to convince an adversary, right? We need to work with these brothers and sisters and come up with approaches that move us to a common goal, right? And at the same time, be clear about what our goal is. Your goal might be reform. My goal is to eliminate this element or this what this looks like altogether. But that requires, and what happens is that is an expensive endeavor in many cases, right? And our communities in Alabama is faced with this right now. On the plate, on a table right now is to spend several $billions to build new prisons in the state of Alabama. That is happening, right? So the approach in Alabama, because the Justice Department has said the conditions that you have in Alabama and your penal system is inhumane, and you need to change and rectify this, and you're under court order to do that. So how do they approach that? The idea then does not dawn on these folks to change the system, right? To look at why
they're gonna put curtains up.
These folks that we didn't do, that we weren't incarcerating 20 or 30 years ago. No, their idea is let's build more prisons.
But
right?
That's the deficit thinking. Because the thing about we're talking about the beloved community, how do you create what you want? And that's what you're talking about. You can abolish something and create something new, but they don't ever think about creating something new that is effective.
And you're talking about several $1 billion to do that, right? So it was no issue that the federal government came up with how to distribute the COVID funds after they decided to distribute COVID funds, right? So the idea was, let's get this money into the hands of the American people, right? And then once they make a decision, they say, okay, now how are we gonna do this?
That's right, which means you can do it. And if
Which
they
means you could do
now, they could always do it. It could have always been done. You could have always helped shore up businesses. You could have always done those things. And we were told, oh, no, though. But you see, again, everything in the dark is coming to the light. And in my opinion, and again, it's not either or. Some things we can fix, some parts we can replace, some things we got to take out and rebuild, all of the above. And I think that when I think of hope and I think of future, we can reach the point, because I remember when I first started doing work around racism, I would have people say, now, can you just not say the word racism? It's so controversial, right? Or they would say, stuff like, I think that what we're looking at is just a few bad apples. You know what I mean? It was like, everything to stop us from having a conversation. So then we started having the conversation, and then folks started checking off, I'm good now. We've had a conversation, right? We're beginning to have the conversation. And then you have, folks that show up and say, no, we got to do better than that. You got to stop hitting me. Okay. You got to stop doing what you're doing to me. We can't heal if you keep hitting me.
You're
So
so resilient. You're so resilient.
you're
You
so
can take
resilient.
it.
You're so strong, you know. And so there's a part that says to me, so we come to that point of awareness, we come to that point of discussion, we come to the point where we, Black Lives Matter, you know, I'm mad as hell, I'm not taking this anymore. We had the protest, we do all those things. We say, now we have to implement change. When we start getting to that point, we have to implement change. What does change look like? And we can say that we want to get to the point where you just don't hit me. We can get to the point where you cannot legally do all these horrible things that you're doing to me, or we can build our humanity. Are you with me? That takes us beyond just being anti-racist or being aware or whatever the box is that you're checking, to say that we recognize the intrinsic worth of all people. We can do that. Now, people tell me you're just a hopeless, that's what they say, you're hopeless integrationist, Joy. That's what you are. But I believe that we have the capacity. You know, I'm looking at my children, my grandchildren, people, you know, these children, and there's extraordinary capacity. But it's back to what you're saying, Bahia. You know, we just, you know, we put some curtains up. We don't want to change anything. But I think in the future, these they will look back at these times and they will say, what was wrong with them? You know, all they could get to was, you know, you took a statue down and you want to pat yourself on the back for that. You know, and I'm not saying that taking the statue down isn't important, but I know that when I think about the struggle of my people, and I look at what we have done in spite of that, and I go, come on now. You know, we've got to see, the whole world sees, and it's not just the United States. You know, anti-Blackness, racism. I mean, when you start looking, you know, they got genocide going on around the world. Right. So we've got to, I think, begin to broaden our perspectives of how and what we are as a humanity, and think beyond just, you know, meeting, you know, getting the Band-Aid. We got to get beyond that. We got to get beyond that and not just be healing, but be healed, you know, and have a trajectory beyond that. So in a word, I want to leave, we don't have a lot of time left, but I want to talk about what reparations looks like to you. Just some ideas about what that is. And I know a lot of people have talked about it, but what do you see and what do you think about in terms of repair? And of course, we've been talking about that.
Well, Black colleges, you went to one, I went to one. I think that's a big piece. I just have to say that real quick.
Yeah. Well, to add to that, I think we had 400 years. We couldn't be educated. I mean, literally, we couldn't be. We're sneaking around trying to read, right? I'm saying, you know, I could deal with 300, 400 years of education, free education, since we're deprived of that, which again, we've never caught up because there's never been parity. There's never been even separate but equal, even when they said that it was never equal. So there's always been, oh my goodness, why can't you catch up? Why can't you? You know, and the truth of the matter is, I think the other part that needs to happen is we need to, as a people, we need to start saying, you know, everybody ain't toe up. You know, everybody, why is it we are always placing this sense of deficit about who we are? We're doing phenomenal things, but it's never highlighted. That's never the highlight. You're always underprivileged or something else. And, you know, Black people we're not a monolith. You know, we are doing all kinds of things. Why can't we showcase those things so that people realize not only is it a possibility, it's happening. And It has always happened, or none of us would be here right now if it weren't something that we were always doing. So I think we have to also become aware, not that we can, but that we are. And that is rarely even the script or the conversation. And, you know, that's why you have people go, my goodness, you're so articulate.
Yeah, I think reparations has to be, I believe it has to be eclectic and malleable. I do think that you have a situation where you see communities like, and I'll take the community I live in now in Montgomery, Alabama, and there are certain ways that the pathologies of of our experiences play out in our communities, okay? And so, and like with incarceration, there are two like obvious ways to deal with that. You know, you could say we want to lock up more people. Or you could say, okay, why are we arresting people? Let's address those issues, right? And so I think that you look at it, and some historians and some theorists have done this. They've looked at the issues in Black community and said, okay, let's address those issues. So I do think that you put money into mental health, and the reforming and addressing our mental health issues, into substance abuse issues, into education and providing meaningful opportunities. When I lived in Savannah for some time, and my daughters worked at the pools. They had like 9 or 10 pools, public pools around the city of Savannah that were free in the summer. Like, you just go to a local pool to go swimming, these kids. And you have these kids, they just love the pools. Who wouldn't love, as kids, access to public pools, and there are no public pools in Montgomery, right? There are no public pools in Montgomery. They are just now, the mayor, we just got a Black mayor, and he's just now revisiting this idea of community centers. And then the idea of job training and apprenticeships, and so I think reparations could come in a multitude of forms, and could address the needs of people where they are. Right. And so my needs might not be as great as my neighbor's needs. Right. And so I'm, just like I didn't get a stimulus check. Right. Now, I'm not mad I didn't get a stimulus check. Right. I'm not, and I've worked this whole time. I worked and my wife worked the whole time during this pandemic. Right. And so for me to sit here and cry about not getting the stimulus check would be ridiculous. I'm glad I'm not in that condition, in that situation. So if my brother has a need that could make his life whole, and that could help him and nurture his children in ways that help, that allows them to move through this society in a more healthier and more fuller and complete way, I need to support that, because then it helps me. That reverberates for me. So I think that the idea of reparations needs. I don't think it's a one size fits all approach.
Sure. And I think
okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I was thinking about what you said, because I've tried to explain this to my children, right? We live in a place where there's not a lot of diversity, right? So a lot of times the Title I schools, or the schools that have all of the culture specific programming, are in schools that are with folks who are struggling more than they are. But they want to be a part of that because they aren't going to see it anywhere else, right? So they're like, hey, so my child did some machinations to get into this low income. I was like, how did you even get into that program? She's like, well, I told them, I found out who one of the coordinators was at another school. And I said, that was my coordinator. But when I got there, the woman recognized me because she knew you. And then she said, you didn't go to that school. And she tried to, but then she came back around and said, my grandmother authored a few of the, so she literally worked her way in completely illegally to this program. I said, if you make any money in this summer program, you're giving it back. Well, they knew who she was. So they let her do the whole summer program. And then she gave me a check on her check, supposed to be $400. So you can't keep it. And she found out that they'd given her 22 something. And I said, let's go get your check. Let's go get your check. That's what you deserve. But I think there has to be some balances, because we have to, part of reparations also is in creating visibility for the potential for, so if you are not, barely making it and need to make sure that you're in free lunch program and all those things, but you also say, well, I know I got that together, but I have this really strong propensity for science or whatever, you have these opportunities to see people who look like you in those. So that's a part of it, is that it's not everybody, like you said, isn't barely making it, but everybody needs repair because of what has happened. Everybody has varying levels of need of repair. And how do you take that? Like, I look at it, and I can, when I was in my last job, I was the only Black person there, but I could easily talk about white supremacy. I could talk about whiteness. I could talk on the West Coast, Northwest. I could say that all day long. I could use it. And I know people who are in Nashville and Georgia who are like, I can't I can't say any of those things.
Let me tell you.
They look at me like, you're here, aren't you? That's basically it.
Right.
You're here. So
Yeah.
I think that there are varying levels of where we have to start to figure out the folks of us who have privilege in certain spaces to use that to make sure we're uplifting the whole. And that collective action, that cooperative economics, all those Kwanzaa words that if we hold so dear to uplift all of our community, we demand that everybody gets what they need.
Right, gets what they need.
Absolutely. And I think the idea of harm that you spoke of, Dr. Robinson, you know, there has been harm. There has been harm, and the harm has been on a lot of different levels, and we have to hold these institutions accountable. It is not just, you know, I didn't do this. Okay, I didn't do this to myself. And again, those of us, and that's what I love about, you know, as people know, my husband will go somewhere else, you know, I love my people. There is nobody like us on the planet. I love my people. And I know that those of us, you know, have gone on to do incredible things and building schools and provide, we're doing the work. And I'm excited about our level of attention and intentionality. I mean, just collectively, you know, I'm here in Atlanta area. I'm in Georgia. I'm really, you know, it's a whole other thing. When you're driving, there's a point when you're driving, you go, we're not stopping. You know, hold it in, because we're not stopping around here, right? You know, we'll be in deliverance in seconds, right? So I'm not, you know,
that's here too. That is definitely here. Anywhere off the I-5 corridor, deliverance.
You're in trouble.
I don't hear.
And a lot of people don't realize, you know, like I'm looking at all these folks that, you know, the senators and folks that are scared. You know, they're the first time in their life they've been scared. Somebody might do something to me, do me something, right? But here somebody gonna do.
I saw a meme that said somebody the white guy got upset with me at the grocery store when I clutched my purse, and I said, I saw your cousins on TV. She's like,
listen, I have, you know, there is, you know, we talked earlier about historically Black colleges. When I attended Alabama State, Alabama State was embroiled in a class action suit, a lawsuit. In Alabama, it was called the Knight versus Alabama. It's a higher education desegregation suit. And so initially, the Alabama State, the city of Montgomery was encouraging the building of a parallel school, a branch of Auburn University, not in Auburn, but in Montgomery, so that white children who wanted to go to a public school, public university, didn't have to come to Alabama State. They could go to Auburn University in Montgomery. And Alabama State sued and said, no, this was in 1967, 68. They said, no, this is a violation, you know, of the Brown case, and separate but equal is no longer the law of the land. And they lost, right? And Auburn University in Montgomery was built. And it did exactly what Black folks said it was going to do. And then they sued again. Now that's when I come to Alabama State. Alabama State and Alabama A&M sue the state of Alabama and say, well, not only you built this school to provide, to maintain and perpetuate segregation through the 1970s and into the 80s, but you have systematically and historically underfunded Alabama State and Alabama A&M, vis-a-vis or in contrast to Auburn University and the University of Alabama. And they fought the state of Alabama and these schools that Black folks cheer for, like the University of Alabama. They fought tooth and nail to keep Black people and Black schools from getting an additional dime. And so, and so after a 20-year lawsuit, Alabama State and Alabama A&M won. Then they went back to court. They said, well, we not only are accusing you and have successfully accused you, the state of Alabama, of systematically and historically underfunding us, but you're doing it now. You're doing it with public education. Yes. And the court said, you're right, they are, but we're not going to offer you a remedy, right? Because they do it through the regressive tax system in the state of Alabama, right? And so these, you know, so we talk about, like, I was in school here in Alabama, when the state of Alabama was continuing its to attempt to segregate based on race and to unequally fund Black colleges, you know, as opposed to their white counterparts. But the state of Alabama continues, and the court said they were continuing to discriminatorily fund poorer school districts, which in many cases are Black school districts. Okay, so when you're talking about education and you're talking about reparations, these are the things, very tangible things that could be done to funnel money into these schools so that they have the same type of, they could pay teachers at the same rate, they could buy equipment and they could accommodate their students in the same way, they could have smaller classroom and more attention in ways, and they could have paraprofessionals. So it's a whole sort of litany of things that come along with, you know, these resources. So I think that so those places are just recently under this Black mayor, the city of Alabama, I mean the county of Montgomery, pushed through you know, a tax referendum, right? And the people, to my surprise, passed this referendum to funnel more money into the schools systems.
That's when you have someone who has some I shouldn't say it like this, but you know, some level of moral compass and actually is doing work for the community. You see what can happen.
You know what they did? They found some Negro out of California to come to Montgomery and come to Alabama and head up an initiative to undermine that tax referendum.
Of course.
Right.
They always find, we have a name for them. Stephen and Stephanie. They find,
you know, from Django. Remember Stephen from Django?
Remember Stephen?
Stephen.
My only problem with Stephen and Stephanie is our Black mayor is named Stephen Reed.
Well, listen.
You don't want to be named
the other Stephen. When they hired to come in there to mess him up. Wait, we had a question. We had one question that came specifically for you in the chat. That said, "Ow, Dr. Robinson, did you maintain your New York accent living all those years in Alabama?"
I don't know. People tell me I still have a New York accent. I don't. You know.
You don't sound like Alabama.
I went to school in Alabama. I went to my undergrad in Alabama. I did a graduate school in Alabama. Then stayed 4 years. Then left and was in Savannah, Georgia.
You sound like you're from New York, but you know what? I went to Fisk University, not that far. A lot of my people actually are living right in Montgomery now. But it's interesting what you say around the people that I know who are huge Alabama fans. And I mean, they're in paraphernalia, their kids in paraphernalia. And a lot of it goes back to, you know, you start to feel an anxiety because the things that you've come to love, everything has been poisoned. I keep thinking of it. My mom used to always tell the story, and maybe because I get creeped out by things like this, around lancing boils. You know, I've seen boils later in life, and
my grandmother. That was Ophelia.
They freak me out. But the point is, we are all truth tellers as people of color. We see underneath that beauty mark that you have, and underneath the makeup and the hair growing out of it, we're saying there's something pussy and disgusting in there. We're like, we see that. You're like, you see that shit? Do you see that? Yes. And they're like, no. It's a beauty mark. And now what's happened is the pus is oozing out all over everyone and it stinks. And that's what they're seeing on the Capitol. All the pussy ooze is what that was. And everybody's like,
I have to use that analogy.
Yeah, that's pretty stark. But you know what? I have some hope. You know, they made a big deal out of Deion Sanders going to Jackson State. You know, he's the new head coach at Jackson State, and he's been able to pull in his son.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. He's a new head coach at Jackson State, wow. And I graduated from Alabama State. I want Alabama State to win all the time, but I hope he could build a juggernaut at Jackson State. You know, and because you know we talk about reparations and we talk about what we could do for ourselves.
That's right.
You know,
that's right.
This is my dilemma, right? My dilemma is that when I look at the University of Alabama football team, it should be at Alabama State. This the whole team is black. I'm talking about the quarterback, the wide receivers.
Oh my God.
Wait, we're in Washington and Oregon. University of Oregon, Oregon State University, you know, all them players, black. But
I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about the defense. I'm like, where are the white boys in Alabama? You know, there's the whole
where are the
team.
kickers?
You know, so now they play somebody like Ohio State. I did my graduate work in Ohio. You know, now, I'm not rooting for Alabama, but it's hard for the whole corn-fed white boys in the Midwest for me to be it's a hard thing.
Why are we corn-fed? Oh, some cows. Anywho. Well, yes,
we have reached the end and over. We always go over. It's no surprise. This has been absolutely delightful.
Yes.
I am so, and I do have a great deal of hope, and I'm so appreciative of your work, Dr. Robinson, and the education that's happening. And I know you have probably been to the memorial, the lynching memorial there, which is incredibly powerful. But again, there is a change in the wind. There is a change. And during this time of COVID, we are doing the work behind the Zoom. We are prepared. And once again, I'm here to say we are not going back. We are going forward. So please be well, be safe, be the healing. Thank you.
And Dr. Robinson, I have a feeling that you'd be great at a game night. So post-COVID, we might have to meet them somewhere. Because I feel like I need you on my team. I feel like I need you on my team, right? We'll have to gather together in Georgia at Mom's or something and get Floyd.
Oh, the campaign.
Floyd don't have to be on my team because I don't feel like Floyd necessarily be good. I think Dr. Robinson.
I've been reminded to remind everyone of the Be the Healing campaign. So we're having the Be the Healing campaign, and we have T-shirts, and we have hoodies, and we have, what do they call? I don't say the hats.
The dad hats.
Dad hats. Yeah. But it is, every little bit helps, and we do help and support private and nonprofit organizations. We're always here to support Black entrepreneurs, Black leadership. It is our goal. It is all part of the healing, and I thank you all for being a part of this and viewing and then
Well, visit the Joy Degruy Publications IG page, and also visit the Joy Degruy. Her Joy Degruy Publications. There's a link there. There's also a link on her Facebook page. If you take a picture of yourself and talking about how you're going to be the healing, we will post you up on all those platforms. So please do that. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Stay connected.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Enjoy it. As you can tell, I enjoyed it.
So did we.